Caucasian predator. Back in the late 70s, somewhere near the looming shadows of the Caucasus Mountains, a spine-chilling yarn began to unfold. Whispers echoed through the remote villages of an unknown predator, prowling the nights, preying on unsuspecting lone travelers. It didn't strike every night, but over 2 months, 3 souls fell victim to this beastly man-eater. Even the well-laid traps of seasoned hunters proved futile. That's when the local authorities stepped into the fray. One dark night, a trio assigned to track the creature stumbled upon the deadly killer, purely by happenstance. As the hunters described it, in the darkness, an eerie fog began to thicken. It didn't blanket the whole area. Instead, it hung over the land like a mysterious cloud in a specific spot. Suddenly, something emerged from it. Something that didn't resemble earthly predators. With a massive body and a beastly mug, the monster stood before them on 2 legs. The distance between them and the creature was about 100 meters. It spotted the hunters and unflinchingly moved in their direction. The men fired their rifles at it. But the creature didn't even flinch, as if the bullets were mere whispers, missing their mark. When the distance to its prey dwindled to 50 meters, something unexpectedly clicked. The beast roared, froze in place, and leaned downward. As it turned out later, it accidentally stumbled into a trap, set by someone in that very spot. This gave the hunters a chance to beat a hasty retreat. Back in the village, the hunters decided to send one of their own by car to the nearest train station. There, they could use a landline to call the police and request backup. The other 2 opted to wait. The backup team arrived only an hour later. The officers were briefed on the situation, and together they headed towards the captured monster. However, upon arrival, there was no sign of the creature or the strange fog. All they found was the trap, devoid of any trace of blood. Law enforcement documented the incident and reported it to their superiors. A week later, the KB joined the operation to catch the unknown entity. After all these years, a retired colonel even spilled the beans on its code name, Caucasian Predator. The area where the strange fog appeared came under surveillance. The Joint Task Force, including military personnel, was now armed with an automatic rifle and a flamethrower. But the monster went silent. Just when everyone started to relax and manned the night watch without fear, the mist reappeared. Just a bit further from the previous location, a sentinel spotted him just in time and quickly woke the sleeping men. The fighters prepared, and the creature described by earlier hunters emerged minutes later. It also charged into the attack, spotting people with flashlights in the darkness. Just like before, even automatic gunfire couldn't kill or wound it. The savior came in the form of a flamethrower, striking the beast in the face with a high-temperature flame as it closed in on the group. The creature grabbed at its eyes with its claw-like hands, and a soldier seized the opportunity, trying to burn its entire body. Soon, the blinded monster collapsed to the ground. It didn't die from the intense fire, but lay wounded, showing signs of life. They dragged it back to the village and, just to be safe, tied it up with ropes. Early in the morning, a military truck arrived, accompanied by cage agents, and it was taken away in an unknown direction. The monster transported to one of the secret military. Medical laboratories managed to survive and recover from severe injuries. It was placed in an iron cage under 24/7 guard. It behaved aggressively, attempting to bend the iron bars to break free. The lab personnel couldn't sedate it at all. Their tranquilizers had no effect. They only managed to draw its blood once while the creature lay wounded and unconscious. However, it did accept raw meat as food from humans. One night, according to two vigilant guards, it transformed before their eyes. It started darting around the cage, then fell to the floor in strange convulsions, and within an hour turned into something resembling a naked human male. The only catch was the skin color, too pale, even whitish, without any pigmentation. The facial features still hinted at a beastly visage. But all the fur disappeared, and the limbs turned into regular human hands and feet. Taking advantage of the situation, the lab personnel tried to establish contact with it as an intelligent being, but there were no responsive intellectual reactions. A few hours later, it died. All further research was conducted with its lifeless body. This might be how Soviet intelligences came face to face with a real werewolf. Not the kind where a person transforms into a beast, but an unknown creature taking on a human guise. The only thing left is to speculate about the mysterious fog that accompanied the appearance of this monster in our world. Grandpa Yakov and the werewolf. Since the 19th century, a tale has lingered about a chilling incident that went down in the heart of rural Russia. It revolves around a small village inhabited by serfs. In some year, a dangerous predator made its lair in the forest near this settlement, attacking late-night travelers. Naturally, after a few human casualties, hunting parties were organized, but the bloodthirsty beast proved elusive. People simply started avoiding the forest trail at night. However, an unprecedented event occurred. In August, an outrageous attack unfolded at the farthest cabin, standing near the edge of the forest. According to the surviving girl's account, a massive wolf barged into the house in the dead of night. The front door, old and flimsy, was torn off its hinges by the monstrous predator. The commotion in the entryway drew the girl's father, who the beast promptly devoured. The mother managed to hide the daughter on the stove, but she herself fell victim to this monster. After this incident, the neighbors took the girl in, and the cabin remained vacant. At the end of August, a lone wanderer named Yakov stumbled upon this village. Without a place of his own, he roamed all over Russia. Here, he asked for a place to stay overnight. The kind folks agreed to provide him with a roof over his head and shared tales of the horrors unfolding in their area. But Yakov, upon hearing about the demonic wolf locals deemed a werewolf, not only wasn't scared, but even expressed a desire to spend the night in that farthest cabin where the attack occurred. Despite the warnings from the locals, Yakov insisted on lodging in that cabin. The old man explained that, at his age, he feared no death, and if luck was on his side, he might rid the village of the monster. The wanderer also hinted that, over his lifetime, he had encountered the supernatural and knew how to ward it off. In the morning, the serfs went to the cabin to check on Yakov and found the Baron's son lying dead right in the yard by the porch, the owner of the village with its serfs. Not far away, on a wooden bench, sat their worldly guest. People would approach the old man to find out what was wrong, and he would reply, "It's the werewolf that's been keeping you down." They later questioned and interrogated Yakov. The stranger recounted the curious folks, how it all went down. He laid on the bench near the window. Since his sleep was light, he heard commotion in the yard amid the night. The old man chose not to go outside, but instead fetched his small mirror and waited. Soon, the planks of the front door creaked, and the crash of its fall echoed. In the entryway, there was a growl, and someone began scratching at the door, leading to the room. That's when Yakov took out the last bit of candle from his backpack, lit it, illuminating the cabin, and went toward the adversary. With determination, he unlocked the door, opening it while holding up the mirror. In the dim entryway, he saw a massive wolf frozen in place, seeing its own reflection. Then, it whined like an injured pup and darted into the yard. Yakov followed and found the sprawled-out young man near the porch. Inspecting him by the candlelight, the old man realized he was dead. As there were no signs of violent murder, they let the wanderer go in peace. But ever since that night, the attacks of the unknown beast ceased. Rescued werewolf. My grandpa always shared this story with a serious tone. He and his buddy were heading home from the woods on a dark autumn evening, rain pouring down. Suddenly, they heard a loud woman's voice screaming for help, and they rushed towards the sound. Soon, they found a deep pit into which an unfamiliar woman in her 30s had fallen. The men asked her how she ended up there, and the poor lady explained that the pit had been covered with branches. Grandpa and his friend were surprised because the local hunters usually didn't dig wolf pits, but someone had the idea to give it a try. The men pondered how to rescue the woman. The trap was deep, and they didn't have any ropes with them. The poor woman had managed not to break her legs in the fall. So, they went off to find a fallen tree that they could lift and carry to the pit. Luckily, they soon stumbled upon one. They tilted it into the pit, diagonally, so that the woman could crawl out on it. With flashlights in hand, they illuminated her, gave advice on the best way to climb, and cheered her on. As the woman started pulling herself up the trunk, my grandpa and his friend noticed that she seemed enveloped in a bluish haze. At first, they chalked it up to a trick of the light. When the woman climbed enough for them to grab her hands, the men seized them and pulled the poor soul out. Suddenly, she slipped from their grasp, and that's when the men saw a wolf in front of them, shrouded in a blue mist. The beast menacingly growled at its rescuers and dashed into the forest. My grandpa and his buddy froze in shock, struggling to believe what they had just witnessed. After a moment, they cautiously made their way back to the road leading to the village. They reached one conclusion. They had freed a real werewolf from the pit. A stuffed werewolf. I heard this tale from a buddy of mine back in our town a while ago. He used to work as a repair locksmith at the silica brick factory. One day, a guy in his 30s joined their team. He had moved from a rural village to the city, and, as he claimed, settled in his aunt's apartment. His aunt rented him a room since she lived there all alone. This guy was quiet, but he excelled as a worker. He had a peculiar trait, though. If you scrutinized his face, you could discern something animal-like about it. By the way, even in my childhood, I encountered people whose features resembled certain animals. For instance, there was a boy at our school who bore a striking resemblance to a monkey, and one history teacher, due to the unique morphology of his prominently protruding jaws, was associated with the illustrated depictions of Neanderthals found in textbooks. Despite his intimidating countenance, Alexei didn't exhibit any malevolence. He didn't stand out in any other significant way. Instead of a cross or a chain, he wore a gilded locket on a cord around his neck. Nothing flashy about it. Then, local newspapers started printing articles about homeless people, tramps, being mauled by dogs. They found mutilated corpses at the landfill or near the cemetery. However, come autumn, their new colleague vanished without a trace. They couldn't find him anywhere. A little later, my friend was staying over at his buddy's place for the weekend. That's when his friend shared a story about his father's hunting experience. He shot an unusual wolf in the woods. Not only did it have a locket hanging around its neck, but its face also bore an eerie resemblance to a human visage. The father handed over the dead wolf's carcass to his hunting buddy and kept the ornament for himself. He showed it to my friend, bringing it from his dad's room. Instantly, my buddy recognized the locket. It belonged to the missing Alexei. But he kept quiet about it. However, the surprises didn't end there. A few months later, my friend was once again staying over at the same buddy's place. This time, he showed him a taxidermy mount made from that wolf. It turned out the guy's father didn't just give the other hunter wolf meat. He commissioned him to turn the dead carcass into a mummy. The taxidermist did his job, but he only mounted the head and chest of the creature. And that sculpture was then affixed to the wall in the hallway, right opposite the entrance doors, beneath a set of moose antlers. My friend, once again, kept silent. It was only years later that he shared this unsettling tale with me, a frosty howl. This incident went down with me in January 1996. I distinctly remember the freezing temperatures dropping below 30 degrees on one of those bone-chilling winter evenings. I had to visit my grandparents in the suburban village. My mother, through her acquaintance, who happened to be a doctor, finally got her hands on some imported pricey heart medication. I was tasked with delivering them straight away. Grandma was struggling with high blood pressure, and delaying the visit until the weekend wasn't an option. After all, she was well into her 80s, and the risk of a fatal heart attack was significant. If my dad wasn't on sick leave with a bout of angina, he could have swung by the village after work, but he was still running a high fever. So, after returning home from the institute in the evening, I had my dinner and set out around 6:30 p.m. Mom packed a whole bag of goodies and a few packs of medication for me. With these in tow, I stepped into our yard, hopped into Dad's car, warmed it up thoroughly, and hit the road. The village itself was about 20 kilometers from the city. Initially, you'd drive along the highway, then take a left turn and proceed on a forest road to reach it. It was precisely in the middle of the forest, about 2 kilometers before reaching my destination, that my car conked out. My attempts to restart it led nowhere. Pondering my next move, I decided to push the car off the road and walk to the village. However, I had to clear a small area with a snow shovel first. It took about 15 minutes. I remember how my earlobes started aching from the cold, and it was getting on my nerves. But there was no other option. Leaving the car in the middle of the road wasn't feasible. Who knows who might come along, oblivious to the bitter cold. So, with a sniffly nose, I diligently cleared the shoulder of snow. Once the required space was freed up, I manually steered the car onto it, locked it, and embarked on my journey on foot. It seemed like a short walk, but walking alone on a deserted road was eerie. Plus, the freezing temperatures weighed on me, and the moonlight had a hazy quality due to the frost. When I had distanced myself about 500 meters from the car, in the darkness beyond the pine trees, a sudden, almost deafening howl echoed. But it wasn't a wolf's howl. I had heard the howls of wolves in person when I used to go hunting with my father back in my school days. This was something entirely different. The unexpected sound made me jump, freezing in place momentarily. Then, perhaps triggered by a self-preservation instinct, my legs propelled me forward with such force that any sprinter would envied. It was as if my legs, acting on their own accord without a command from my brain, lifted off the ground and carried me away. I didn't look back. The world behind and to the side ceased to exist for me. I was sprinting, flying forward without a single thought in my head. This is probably one of those cases where people say someone is running blindly. It all boils down to altered perception due to a stressful situation. I only snapped out of the partial stupor at the very edge, gasping for breath, legs weakened by the fear I had just experienced. I finally turned around to check if anyone was behind me, but the forest road on that moonlit night was deserted. After catching my breath, I headed towards my grandparents' cabin. They were overjoyed to see me. I handed them the bag, explaining its contents, and recounted the trouble I encountered on the way, including the strange howling in the forest. As for the latter, my grandpa, an experienced hunter himself, couldn't confirm anything, as he hadn't heard it. Concerning my return journey, he went to ask my neighbor, Uncle Michael. The jovial, portly fellow drove an old Jeep. After about 10 minutes, while I was still warming up with a cup of hot tea, Grandpa returned and informed me that Michael would not only take me home, but also tow my car back to the city. Initially, I hesitated, not wanting to deal with a stalled car in the freezing cold, especially when there might be something unknown lurking nearby. But Uncle Mike reassured me that everything would be fine. Free of charge for me. We drove to the place where my car was parked. We needed to turn its front towards the city to attach it to Uncle Mike's Jeep. And just as we started rolling the car onto the road, that eerie howl suddenly echoed again from behind the dark, creepy trees. We both jumped, and we heard the crunching of snow in our direction. Michael and I squinted into the darkness and noticed a figure approaching us. Soon, we made out an unfamiliar man in a tattered jacket, with long shoulder-length hair, a beard, and mustache. He wore summer shorts and rubber boots below the knees. He stopped in front of us, scrutinized both of us, and then, clutching his sides with both hands, uttered with a half-toothless mouth, "Balls are frozen. Can't go on." After these words, the homeless man tilted his head up and let out a wild, prolonged howl at the moon, scaring away a crow perched high on a branch. The bird hastily flew away from this place. The unfortunate man, in his desolation, crossed the snowy road and disappeared behind the trees on the other side of the shoulder. Michael and I watched him with sympathetic eyes and continued with our task. Soon, our tandem of vehicles hit the road towards our hometown. My soul sang with happiness that everything ended so well, and I didn't encounter a ferocious werewolf with fangs on the road, but rather an unfortunate freezing wanderer. And I shared this story with you because the other night I woke up to the prolonged howling outside my window. In the darkness, I couldn't see who was making that chilling sound, but I have a hunch about who it might be.